Alright, let's talk about a Space Marine chapter that somehow keeps slipping under the radar. A group that, despite their ferocity, discipline, and rich lore, rarely gets the spotlight they deserve. I'm talking about the Iron Snakes. Not Ultramarines, not Blood Angels, not even the more exotic Carcharodons or Minotaurs. No, this is a chapter that quietly operates in the dark tides of the Imperium, saving entire systems from destruction while barely leaving a whisper in the histories. And that's exactly what makes them so fascinating. The Iron Snakes aren't your typical poster boys of the Imperium. There are no monuments raised in their honor on Terra, no propaganda reels featuring their deeds, no grandiose parades. Yet their actions echo just as loudly, if you know where to listen. They are warriors sculpted not by glory but by necessity. Fighters whose story lives in the margins, not the centerfold. Their silence is not a void, but a statement. In a galaxy that worships spectacle, they have chosen the path of purpose. So why are they so underrated? Maybe it's because they don't fit the mold. They don't spout flowery speeches about honor or martyrdom. They don't crave the approval of the High Lords or the reverence of planetary governors. They're a mythos carved from sea salt and ritual, from harpoons and single combat, from vows whispered into brine rather than broadcasted through Vox networks. They operate in a part of the galaxy few know about, and fewer survive. And yet, the more you dig, the clearer it becomes. The Iron Snakes are not just another chapter lost in the shuffle. They're something else, something older, stranger, maybe even purer. If you've ever looked at the galaxy of Warhammer 40k and thought, surely there are heroes we've forgotten, well, maybe you were thinking of them. Let's dive in. The story of the Iron Snakes begins in a place most Imperial citizens have never heard of, the Reef Stars. It's an obscure cluster of oceanic worlds far from the golden thrones of power and prestige, but that's where the chapter calls home. Unlike the better-known chapters whose origins are draped in banners and ceremony, the Iron Snakes emerge not with fanfare, but with quiet determination. Their founding isn't even entirely clear. Most agree it was during the so-called Second Founding, but the exact timing is frustratingly vague. Some archivists even suggest a later date, pointing to their unusual structure and customs as evidence of a more experimental design. But perhaps that's the point. They were never meant to be like the others. From the start, the Iron Snakes were built for a specific task, to be the guardians of the Reef Stars and to ensure that no Xenos force would ever take root in this isolated region of space. It's a role that sounds simple on paper, defend this one zone, but the reality is much more profound. The Reef Stars aren't just backwater worlds. They're treacherous, watery, and riddled with ancient ruins and forgotten technologies. Pirates, heretics, and worse crawl through its depths like vermin. To guard such a place requires more than bolt guns and gene seed. It requires something closer to religious commitment. And that's where the Iron Snakes differ. They don't just protect. They belong. This connection to their region is almost spiritual. While other chapters operate across vast swaths of the galaxy, the Iron Snakes have always anchored themselves to a very defined place. They aren't crusading warriors like the Black Templars or galaxy policing strategists like the Ultramarines. Their duty is local, specific, and eternal. And that, in many ways, makes them feel more grounded, more real, than many other Space Marine forces. They're like ancient coastal sentinels, forever watching the shores, never turning their eyes away, even when the rest of the Imperium forgets that danger ever lurked there. One of the most unique elements of their foundation lies in how they perceive their task. The Iron Snakes don't treat war as something glorious or poetic. It's duty. It's survival. It's ritual. Their missions are called oaths, and they're accepted with an almost monastic seriousness. Every campaign, no matter how small, is treated as sacred. That's not something we see often in other chapters. There's a weight to everything they do, a kind of personal accountability that goes beyond codex traditions. When an Iron Snake takes an oath, he is essentially saying, "This will end with either the enemy's death or mine." And that changes how you fight. That changes how you live. Then there's their apparent lineage. While not officially confirmed, many fans believe the Iron Snakes are descended from the Ultramarines. There are hints in their discipline, their measured strategies, their aesthetic even. But at the same time, they've distanced themselves from Gilliman's blueprint in meaningful ways. For one, they don't follow the standard 10-company structure. More on that later, but already this deviation speaks volumes. They're not rule breakers, but they're not mindless adherents either. They've crafted something personal, something that fits the place they guard. And yet, despite their deviation, they're not considered renegades or radicals. The High Lords of Terra may barely speak of them, but they recognize their worth. When the call for reinforcement goes out, the Iron Snakes answer, not out of a hunger for glory, but out of obligation. Their loyalty to the Imperium is not questioned, even if it's not loudly praised. That, in itself, says something powerful. In a universe where loyalty is often performative, the Iron Snakes offer something quiet but unshakable. They don't need medals. They don't need campaigns named after them. They need only their oaths. And that has been enough for thousands of years. There's also something uniquely tribal in how they preserve their heritage. Unlike other chapters that preserve their history through ornate libraries or liturgical archives, the Iron Snakes pass theirs through oral tradition and carved symbols. Their armor and weapons are often etched with stories and names, not to impress others but to remind themselves. Their past is not something they parade, it's something they carry. That weight, that awareness of lineage and sacrifice, bleeds into how they fight and how they serve. Every brother knows the names of the fallen. Every name matters. Fans often speculate that this deeper connection to their mission, this almost spiritual guardianship, is exactly why they don't seek fame. In forums and fan communities, you'll often find people comparing them to the old mythic warrior saints or even knightly orders from ancient Terra's past. There's a sense of timelessness to them, like they exist slightly out of sync with the bombastic present-day Imperium. They're not here to win applause, they're here to endure. And endurance, ultimately, is what defines them. The Iron Snakes aren't built to burn bright and fade away. They're not the flashy sword, they're the shield planted in sand, holding fast against endless tides. Their origin story isn't about grand campaigns or apocalyptic battles. It's about a promise made long ago, to a place many will never visit, to protect people most will never know. And they've kept that promise, year after year, war after war, in silence. They don't ask for recognition, but maybe, just maybe, they deserve it. You can't talk about the Iron Snakes without talking about Ithaca. It's not just their homeworld, it's their crucible, their cathedral, their mirror. Set deep within the reef stars, Ithaca is a world defined by salt, sea, and silence. Towering cliffs plunge into storm-tossed oceans. The air is thick with brine and myths, and the people, rugged, quiet, enduring, are carved from the same stone as their warriors. To be raised on Ithaca is to know hardship not as an obstacle, but as a daily companion. It makes sense that a chapter like the Iron Snakes would grow here. This place doesn't just breed warriors, it breeds watchers. But there's a strange consequence to being so geographically and culturally isolated. No one really talks about you. The galaxy of Warhammer 40k is a loud, sprawling theater. You've got entire segmentums screaming for attention. Hive worlds choking on their own importance. Star systems obliterated in firestorms just to make a point. And then there's Ithaca, distant, humble, forgotten. The reef stars aren't a strategic hub, they're not a trade nexus. They're a cluster of storm-racked ocean worlds tucked into a far-off corner of Imperial space. That isolation protects them, but it also erases them from the wider narrative. Even within Imperial records, you'll find little more than scattered references to Ithaca and its defenders. It's not that the Administratum doesn't value the Iron Snakes, it's just that they rarely have to. The chapter handles its own affairs with brutal efficiency. They don't call for reinforcements, they don't burden the Imperium with endless requests for resources or glory. They simply act. And in a galaxy powered by bureaucratic noise, silence becomes invisibility. What's fascinating is how deliberate that invisibility might be. Some fans argue that the Iron Snakes have no interest in being known because being known invites scrutiny, and scrutiny disrupts purpose. If you're busy writing reports to Terra, you're not hunting genestealers in coral caverns. If your name is being sung by remembrancers, you're not fighting off void-born horrors in the shadow of sea moons. The Iron Snakes don't just endure isolation, they weaponize it. Their fortress monastery isn't a gleaming spire or obsidian citadel. It's carved into the cliffs of Ithaca, battered by salt winds and sea spray. Visitors, when they're allowed, describe it as more like a temple or ancestral tomb than a fortress. Every wall is scarred with storm marks, every chamber echoes with quiet. It's not a place designed to impress, it's a place designed to last. And perhaps that's the clearest reflection of how they see themselves. Not as heroes to be admired, but as stones in the tide, unmoving, unspeaking, unbroken. This deep bond with their homeworld means the Iron Snakes rarely venture far. Most of their campaigns take place within or around the Reef Stars, and even when they do act beyond it, their deployment is typically small, fast, and surgical. No grand warfronts, no massive banners, just a squad, a name, and a mission. It's incredibly efficient and completely unmarketable. In a universe obsessed with spectacle, this restraint is almost radical. There's something poetic in the idea that their greatest strength is also the reason no one talks about them. Because when you think about the legendary chapters, their legacies are built on battles shouted from the rooftops. Macragge, Armageddon, Bale. But the Iron Snakes? Their legacy is whispered through water, murmured across windswept reefs, shared through the salt-lined stories of coastal villages. They exist in myth more than in doctrine. And that myth doesn't reach Terra. It stays local, tight, intimate. And this isn't just a matter of pride or humility, it has tactical implications too. Their knowledge of local geography, tide patterns, even the behavior of native Xenos fauna, this stuff gives them an edge no orbital scan can replicate. They're not just soldiers sent to pacify planets, they're part of the terrain. They fight like the sea itself, patient, relentless, always returning. Their isolation doesn't make them blind, it makes them precise. Still, it does raise a question. How many other chapters like them are out there? How many other defenders are holding the line in forgotten corners of the galaxy, their deeds buried beneath centuries of ocean storms and neglected records? Fans sometimes refer to chapters like the Iron Snakes as silent bulwarks. Forces whose contribution to Imperial survival is immeasurable but invisible. It's a humbling idea. For every chapter that makes it into the Codex Astartes, how many more have chosen silence over spectacle? And then there's the cultural impact of isolation. Living on Ithaca, immersed in local traditions and maritime rites, the Iron Snakes have developed a worldview that's more grounded than most. They're not concerned with philosophical purity like the Dark Angels or spiritual transcendence like the Blood Angels. Their belief system is tactile, ritualistic, rooted in tides and salt and steel. Their identity isn't layered in metaphysical dogma, it's built from shared hardship and lived memory. That gives them a kind of cohesion that's hard to replicate. Every brother isn't just a warrior, he's Ithacan. That unity is a weapon all its own. And yet, despite all this strength, despite all this purpose, the Iron Snakes remain in the background. They're not featured in popular Imperial iconography. They're not cited in lectures by Schola Progenium instructors. You won't find shrines to them on shrine worlds. To the wider Imperium, they might as well not exist. And maybe that's the greatest irony of all, that a chapter so devoted to protection has remained so unrecognized, not because they failed, but because they succeeded too quietly. But those who know, know. Those who've seen their work, or lived because of it, tell stories that ripple through the void like long-forgotten songs. Songs not sung by choirs, but carried in sea spray, between the silence of waves. When you look at how the Iron Snakes go to war, the first thing that hits you is how unorthodox it all feels. This isn't mass deployment. This isn't waves of battle brothers descending from the skies in thunderous drop pods. There are no crusade banners, no ritual declamations broadcast over planetary Vox networks. Instead, there's a kind of surgical calm to how they operate, deliberate, small-scale, and brutally effective. They don't move like a hammer, they move like a harpoon. Precise, targeted, unforgiving. Most of their combat deployments consist of squads that rarely exceed 10 battle brothers. And it's not because they lack the numbers, it's because they don't need them. That's the part that always blows people away the first time they learn about them. One squad, one ship, one mission. The entire war effort boiled down to a single unit acting with total autonomy, and they do this regularly. While most chapters would consider such actions suicide, for the Iron Snakes, It's doctrine. They trust their brothers. They trust the oaths. And more than that, they trust the silence. That mental discipline, that confidence in operating without backup, comes from their roots on Ithaca, where danger comes from below and you're never sure if help will arrive before the tide turns. Their battlefield tactics reflect this same mindset. They don't rely on overwhelming force. Instead, they utilize terrain, timing, and targeted strikes. Every engagement is calculated. Every movement rehearsed, but never mechanical. It's more like instinct refined by tradition. They're trained to be part of their environment, to move with the rhythm of the battlefield, not against it. You'll rarely see them holding static lines or engaging in grinding attrition. That's not their way. If an Iron Snake is holding ground, it's because that exact piece of terrain is the fulcrum on which the entire operation turns. A lot of fans compare them to predators of the deep, sharks, eels, even kraken. Not just because of their oceanic origins, but because of how they strike. Quick, lethal, and without warning. There's this myth among Reef Star's pirates that if you see the Iron Snakes, you're already dead. And it's not just myth. Their ability to infiltrate, isolate, and exterminate specific targets with minimal collateral damage has turned them into ghost stories. Some Xenos raiders abandon their plunder entirely when they hear that an oath has been taken. They know what it means. And that's another fascinating detail. The oaths. Every deployment is tied to an oath. It's not just an operational objective, it's a sacred promise. And that shifts the entire dynamic. They're not just fulfilling a command structure. They're enacting a personal and spiritual contract. This adds a psychological edge to their fighting style. They won't leave a mission half-finished. They won't fail because failure isn't just a tactical loss, it's a betrayal of the oath, of the reef, of their name. That changes how you fight. That changes what you're willing to do. One of the most intriguing aspects of their strategy is the absence of large-scale vehicle use. Sure, they have dreadnoughts and rhinos, but they don't rely on armored convoys or heavy mechanized forces like some of the more siege-oriented chapters. You won't see Iron Snakes digging in with land raiders and predators. Instead, they favor mobility over mass. A single transport, a fast strike from an unexpected angle, and then they disappear. It's the same logic as a tide pool ambush. Wait for the enemy to enter the reef, and then strike where the armor's thinnest. Because of this, they've developed a reputation as master skirmishers. Not in the hit-and-run way of Eldar or the guerrilla tactics of the Raven Guard, but in their own distinct flavor. Their engagements often feel mythic in tone. One squad facing impossible odds, holding a breach until the enemy breaks. It's the kind of thing that inspires saga, even if no one's left to sing it. And maybe that's why their stories linger in whispers. They don't need grand campaigns to build legend. They just need one perfect kill. There's also the matter of local adaptability. The Iron Snakes have developed a fighting style uniquely suited to aquatic and semi-aquatic environments. Combat in archipelagos, sea fortresses, underwater structures, this is where they thrive. Most chapters would struggle in such conditions, with their bulky gear and codex pattern deployments. The Iron Snakes, by contrast, train for this. They move through water like it's air. Their armor is treated against salt corrosion. Their blades are weighted for underwater swings. Even their bolters are adapted for submersion resistance. It's all been thought through. It's all deliberate. One of my favorite theories that fans toss around is that the Iron Snake's tactics evolved less from Codex Astartes' doctrine and more from Ithacan naval traditions. There's no formal confirmation, but it feels right. Their whole approach, isolated precision, small crews, fast strikes, it mirrors how ancient Terran mariners operated. Each squad is like a trireme crew. Each mission is a voyage, and each kill is a returned offering to the sea. And there's something beautiful in how they balance aggression with restraint. They never fight more than necessary. They don't scorch the ground. They don't exterminate entire populations out of frustration or paranoia. Their war is scalpel, not hammer. And that, in a galaxy of constant overkill, makes them terrifying. Because when they do decide to eliminate something, they do it completely. Quietly. With no drama, no warnings, and no survivors. That kind of control takes more than just training. It takes a philosophy. The Iron Snakes aren't trying to be legendary. They're trying to be precise. And in that precision, they become myth. They don't need you to remember their names, just to feel the cold steel beneath the tide. There's a kind of gravity to the way the Iron Snakes fight that goes beyond tactics. It's not just about how they move or how they strike. It's the why that makes them different. And that why is written into every fiber of their being, through a code that feels less like a military doctrine and more like a living scripture. The Iron Snakes don't operate based on convenience, protocol, or self-preservation. They act because they've sworn to. Not just as a unit, but as individuals. That's the heart of it. Each brother carries an oath like a blade, and breaking it would be worse than death. Every mission is tied to an oath. But these aren't the kind of oaths we usually see tossed around in the Imperium, empty promises or grand declarations shouted into the void. The Iron Snake's oaths are personal, they're sacred. Before each deployment, the chosen warriors make a vow at the waters of Ithaca, often invoking the spirits of the reef and the memory of the fallen. It's not ceremony for the sake of ritual. It's accountability. If you fail, your name is marked. If you falter, the salt itself remembers. One of the most defining aspects of their code is this idea of singular responsibility. While many other chapters function through coordinated squads and rigid command structures, the Iron Snakes often empower individual Marines to act with near-total autonomy. That doesn't mean they're lone wolves or reckless. It means they're expected to think, to decide, to own the consequences of every shot fired and every breath drawn in battle. That level of responsibility isn't just rare in the Imperium. It's dangerous. It demands a level of inner discipline that most warriors will never touch. And this isn't just about battlefield behavior. It shapes how they see themselves. There's no glory seeking in the Iron Snakes. No internal politics or contests for status. The measure of a Marine isn't based on kill counts or medals. It's based on whether he kept his word, whether he fulfilled his oath. And if he didn't, even if the mission succeeded, there's a stain that lingers. It's internal, deep, and that psychological weight makes them fight like men with no exit but forward. Other chapters find this alien. Not wrong, necessarily, but unnerving. There are records of Ultramarine captains struggling to coordinate with Iron Snakes during joint operations, not because of disobedience, but because the Snakes refused to deviate from a vow taken before arrival. Even when a situation changes, even when logic might demand a new plan, the Iron Snakes cling to the oath. They would rather die fulfilling it than live having altered it. It's not inflexibility, it's belief. And belief in a galaxy ruled by bureaucracy and paranoia is often seen as a threat. This kind of absolutism, while noble in some ways, creates a strange tension between them and the wider Imperium. They're not radicals, they're not traitors, but they're different. Hard to predict, hard to control. The High Lords prefer chapters they can slot into charts and codices. The Iron Snakes defy that. They follow rules, yes, but not Terra's rules, not Gilliman's rules. They follow Ithaca's rules, the Reef's rules. And those rules are carved in salt and blood. A fan once described them as knights with no audience. That stuck with me, because it captures the essence of their code, this mix of internal honor and external indifference. They don't need you to approve, they don't care if you understand. They made a promise, and they're going to see it through. There's a beauty in that. A loneliness too, but a beauty. Their approach to mercy, or the lack thereof, also fits into this rigid code. The Iron Snakes do not show clemency to those who break oaths. Traitors, deserters, oath breakers. There is no place for them in the chapter's ranks. Some believe this severity stems from ancient Ithacan maritime laws, where breaking an oath could condemn an entire crew to death at sea. Others think it's a metaphysical stance, that failing to complete an oath severs your spirit from the reef, from the soul of Ithaca itself. Whatever the reason, the Iron Snakes don't forgive. Not in this. And that unyielding mindset translates into an eerie calm in battle. They don't scream war cries. They don't taunt the enemy. They move like a storm rolling over the sea, silent, unstoppable, inevitable. There's no fear in them, not because they lack emotion, but because fear is irrelevant once the oath is made. You're already committed. You're already claimed. It's like they're possessed by the very words they spoke before the battle, and that possession makes them utterly, chillingly focused. Even their dueling customs reflect this. It's said that among the Iron Snakes, A warrior may issue a challenge to settle disputes, but only if he's willing to swear an oath beforehand. And that oath carries the same weight as any battlefield vow. If you lose the duel, you're expected to carry the mark of that loss. If you win, you bear the responsibility of restraint. It's not just fighting, it's covenant, and that's something few other chapters truly understand. What's fascinating is how much of their code is lived, not written. Unlike the rigid doctrines of the Codex Astartes, the Iron Snakes preserve their laws through spoken word, memory, and ritual. Their apothecaries and librarians act more like oral historians than archivists. There's a humanity to it all, strangely enough. A closeness. These warriors aren't just soldiers following orders. They're men walking a line, etched by ancestors and spirits, by tides and tempests, by the oath that waits in the salt. And so when people say the Iron Snakes are strange, or cold, or distant, it's true. They are. But it's not because they lack heart. It's because their heart beats to a rhythm that isn't Terran. It's Ithacan. It's old. And it's not for us to understand. It's only for them to follow, even unto death. When you first learn about the Iron Snake structure, it almost feels like a misprint. 100 warriors. One company. That's it. No 10 companies. No chapter banners unfurling in rigid sequence. Just a single, unified body of battle brothers known as the Ithaca Company. For anyone raised on Codex Astartes logic, this setup sounds incomplete, primitive even. But once you spend some time with the lore and you really sit with what that structure means, it becomes clear. This isn't a weakness. It's the core of who they are. Other chapters operate like military organizations. They have ranks, formations, specialized companies, reserve forces, and endless bureaucracy to manage it all. The Iron Snakes chose something radically different. Their one-company structure is tight, personal, and deeply symbolic. It's not just a logistical decision, it's a worldview. In their eyes, the chapter isn't an institution, it's a brotherhood, a single, breathing organism. To divide it would be to weaken it. Think about the implications. Every Marine in the Ithaca Company knows every other Marine. Their strengths, their flaws, their scars. They train together, they swear oaths together. They share the same rituals, the same battle prayers, the same salt in their lungs. There are no strangers among them, no nameless reserve units waiting for orders. Every warrior is active, every warrior is trusted, and that trust is worth more than 1,000 warriors raised from spreadsheets and induction programs. It also changes the way they fight, because there's no distinction between veterans and neophytes the way other chapters handle it. If you're in the company, you've earned your place. It doesn't matter whether you fought 10 wars or 100, you carry the same burden, the same authority, the same accountability. That flat hierarchy strips away ego. You're not fighting for promotion, you're fighting because it's your oath, your reef, your people. Rank doesn't determine worth. Deeds do. Now, that's not to say there's no leadership. Of course there is. The chapter is led by a commander, and there are squad leaders and specialists. But the structure is more tribal than institutional, more organic than codified. Fans have often compared it to a ship's crew, where every sailor has a role but all are bound to the same hull. It creates a kind of cohesion that most chapters can't replicate. You don't just follow orders because someone told you to. You follow because the man giving them has bled beside you. And then there's the administrative beauty of it. With only 100 Marines to manage, the Iron Snakes are free from the suffocating bureaucracy that haunts larger chapters. No shuffling reports between companies, no redundant chains of command. When the commander of the Iron Snakes speaks, he speaks to all of them. And when an oath is taken, the company moves as one body. That unity isn't just logistical, it's spiritual. There's also something fascinating about how flexible this makes them. While other chapters are often locked into rigid roles, this company for assault, that one for fire support, the Iron Snakes adapt on the fly. Each squad is capable of handling a broad range of tasks. Tactical flexibility becomes part of their identity. One day you're breaching a heretic stronghold underwater, the next you're hunting tyrannid spores in a fog-choked jungle. And through it all, there's no shifting of positions, no rotating of personnel. You train with your brothers. You fight with your brothers. You die with your brothers. Some fans have speculated that this structure has roots in ancient Ithacan warrior bands, small elite units bound by oath and blood rather than rank. Others think it's a reaction to the failures of the Codex Astartes, that after so many millennia of warfare, the Iron Snakes saw the limitations of fragmentation and chose something simpler, something older. It's a compelling idea. After all, the Codex isn't infallible. It's a doctrine born of necessity, not perfection. And the Iron Snakes don't just serve doctrine, they serve truth. The truth of survival, the truth of trust. And you have to admit, there's a certain elegance in the simplicity. One company, one purpose, one unbreakable will. No reserves, no auxiliaries. If a brother falls, he is replaced only when another earns the right. Not through quotas or recruitment mandates, but through trial. Through the ritual of the reef. That strict control of numbers gives every Marine a sense of sacred responsibility. You're not just filling a slot, you're continuing a legacy. Of course, this singular structure comes with risk. A major loss could cripple the entire chapter, and yet that risk seems to be part of the design. The Iron Snakes don't operate out of fear. They operate out of belief. Belief that if each warrior is sharpened to a perfect edge, then 100 is enough. That quality can replace quantity. That resolve can outlast numbers, and in many ways, they've proven it. Other chapters may raise an eyebrow at their methods, but none can deny the results. The Reef Stars remain defended, Xeno's incursions are crushed, Chaos cults disappear before their infection can spread, and all of it done without reinforcement, without glory, without fanfare, just the company and the oath in the sea. And I think that's why this structure endures. Because it doesn't just work, it means something. It says something about who the Iron Snakes are and who they refuse to become. They don't want to be a machine, they want to be a brotherhood. And in a galaxy where even angels become monsters, that kind of unity might just be the rarest weapon of all. You don't have to squint too hard to see it. There's something unmistakably ancient and mythic in the way the Iron Snakes are presented. From their names to their rituals, from the design of their armor to the structure of their society, the echoes of old Earth's Hellenic legends ring loud in their lore. They're not just space marines. They're modern-day hoplites forged in ceramite rather than bronze, carrying bolters instead of spears, but still chasing the same ideals. Honor, courage, unity, and above all else, duty to the brotherhood. Let's start with the surface. The names alone feel like they've been lifted from some lost scroll of Homeric verse. Petro, Dymas, Priad, Telemachus. You can almost imagine them shouting war cries across the wine-dark sea, sailing on black ships to distant shores where monsters and prophecy await. These aren't just cool names, they carry weight, tradition, and a kind of tragic gravitas. There's something solemn and timeless in them, like they've been fighting since the world was young and the stars were still learning to burn. And that's the point. The Iron Snakes embody an archetype, the heroic warrior, the chosen son of the sea, tested by the gods and bound by oath. It's not an accident. Their homeworld Ithaca isn't just a poetic name, it's a deliberate reference to the island kingdom of Odysseus. And like Odysseus, the Iron Snakes are always voyaging, always fighting, always returning with stories that blur the line between history and legend. Each campaign becomes a kind of epic. Each squad is a band of Argonauts, setting sail into the void to face the unknown. But it goes deeper than aesthetics. Their entire philosophy of war mirrors that of the ancient Greek warrior ideal. The Iron Snakes don't fight as scattered individuals. They fight as a phalanx, interlocked, unified, aware of each other's position and duty. Even when squads act independently, they do so with the understanding that their actions ripple through the whole. Just like the hoplite shield wall, where each man protected the one beside him, the Iron Snakes survive because they are each other's armor. One of my favorite details is how they don't just embody the might of Greek warriors, they embody the restraint. In Homeric myth, true heroism was never just about how many enemies you could slay. It was about knowing when to hold back, when to offer mercy, when to listen to fate. The Iron Snakes reflect this. They are not berserkers. They don't revel in slaughter. Their violence is controlled, ritualistic, bound to their oaths, and shaped by necessity. They fight not because they want to, but because they must. And that moral tension, that quiet sense of burden, is what makes them feel real. There's also the role of fate. In the old myths, fate was a force greater than the gods, a thread that wove through every hero's life. The Iron Snakes, too, live with a constant awareness of legacy and obligation. They believe that the sea remembers, that oaths leave echoes, that the names of the dead are not gone, but waiting in the depths. It's a kind of cosmic accountability. When they step onto a battlefield, they do so knowing they are reenacting an ancient pattern, a cycle of sacrifice and return, of departure and homecoming. It makes every fight feel like more than just a battle. It feels like a page in an unending epic. Fans have long speculated that Dan Abnett, who gave us the most vivid portrait of the Iron Snakes in his novel, intended them as a kind of cultural bridge, an attempt to show how myth and science fiction aren't opposites but complements, that you can have power armor and plasma rifles and still speak in the voice of Homer. And honestly, it works. The Iron Snakes feel like they walked out of a dream, the kind of dream you'd have after reading both the Iliad and the Codex Astartes in one sitting. And then there's the idea of the heroic death. Among the Iron Snakes, dying in the fulfillment of an oath is not a tragedy. It's a fulfillment, a completion. You see this again and again in their stories. Warriors who go into battle knowing they will not return and doing it anyway, not out of blind obedience but out of personal conviction. That's pure myth. That's Achilles charging the gates of Troy. That's Leonidas standing at Thermopylae. The Iron Snakes don't fear death because they've already made peace with it. They're not trying to escape it. They're trying to give it meaning. Even their appearance reinforces this mythic identity. Their armor is more than just functional, it's symbolic. The bronze tones, the crested helms, the sea-worn detailing. You look at them, and they don't feel like part of a machine. They feel like relics, like guardians of some sacred flame that no one else remembers. And in a universe as vast and impersonal as Warhammer 40k, that sense of intimacy, of ancient purpose, is something rare and deeply compelling. There's a scene in the Iron Snakes novel that always stuck with me. One of the Marines performs a solitary ritual before diving into a near-suicidal mission. No audience, no fanfare, just a quiet moment of reflection, hands dipped in salt water, words whispered to the spirits of the reef. It doesn't feel like science fiction. It feels like something older than time, like something from a campfire, passed down from father to son. And I think that's what makes the Iron Snakes special. They remind us that in a galaxy of noise and horror, there's still room for stories, for heroes, for the quiet nobility of a man who keeps his word even when no one's watching. So yeah, the Iron Snakes may wear power armor and fly through space, but in their hearts, they're still rowing the black ships, still sailing toward the edge of the world, not for glory, but because the gods demanded it. And in doing so, they remind us that even in the far future, myth never dies. It just wears new armor. If there's one thing that sets the Iron Snakes apart even more than their tactics or their structure, it's their faith. This deep, ancient, almost primal reverence for the sea and the spirits within it. In a galaxy full of imperial dogma, mechanical devotion, and monolithic worship of the Emperor as a god, the Iron Snakes stand quietly apart. Not heretical, not rebellious, but different. Intimate, and rooted in something older than the Imperium itself. The salt, the water, and the unseen presences that dwell beneath both. Their connection to the sea isn't just metaphorical. It's sacred. Ithaca is an ocean world, yes, but it's not just that they were born near the waves. They belong to them. They speak to the sea as if it listens. They bless their weapons in salt water. They cast oaths into the surf. Some whisper prayers before battle, not to the Emperor in his golden throne, but to the reef, to the deep, to the nameless guardians of the abyss who have protected them since before memory began. There's something haunting about that, something strangely human. In a universe defined by steel and fire, they still believe in the tide, and they don't just believe, they act on it. Their rituals are soaked in oceanic symbolism. Every new recruit is drawn from Ithaca's coastal clans, and initiation always involves water. Baptism by drowning, by endurance, by surrender. They must prove they can listen to the reef, that they can survive its fury and understand its silence, because that's where the spirits dwell, in silence, in pressure, in the weight of water that knows no mercy and no haste. There's this recurring idea in fan circles that the Iron Snakes may have preserved fragments of pre-imperial religion, something local that was never fully overwritten by the ecclesiarchy. Not out of defiance, but because the reef simply was, long before missionaries ever landed on their shores. And the chapter, shaped by that world, folded the emperor into their beliefs rather than abandoning the old ways entirely. So yes, they recognize the emperor's divinity. But it's not the same as shouting Ave Imperator with raised fists. For them, he's a great spirit, a father of oaths, a silent judge who watches from the depths, not from the stars. It's a more intimate theology, a quieter one. Some fans have theorized that this veneration of the sea isn't just symbolic. It might be a form of psychic connection, a subtle communion with the warp through local phenomena that the Imperium hasn't fully charted. After all, water has always held an association with hidden depths and change. And the reef itself, constantly shifting, growing, devouring, has a strange rhythm that resonates with the iron snake's internal structure. Perhaps the spirits they speak of are echoes in the warp, filtered through tradition and myth. Or perhaps there's something else entirely, entities older than chaos, older than the emperor, bound to Ithaca alone. The truth remains a mystery, and that mystery, I think, is part of their strength. We also see this faith reflected in their language. Their oaths often invoke the deep. Their battle cries are not screams, but declarations of return. The reef will remember. The tide knows my name. Salt takes the lyre. These aren't just poetic phrases. They're contracts. Spiritual reminders that nothing spoken in the presence of the sea is ever forgotten. That words once given bind you more surely than chains. Their chaplains, though that's not what they call them, function more like shamans or sea priests than battlefield morale officers. They carry relics that aren't just bones or sainted bolt shells, but fragments of coral, preserved seawater, pieces of ancient shells worn smooth by generations of hands. These relics aren't worshipped as icons of the emperor. They're seen as living conduits, reminders that even in the void of space, the reef is watching. That the ocean, real or remembered, travels with them. It's even said that the iron snakes avoid dry worlds unless absolutely necessary. Not because they're incapable of fighting there, they absolutely are, but because they consider such places barren, spiritually speaking. There's a sense of disconnection in the dust and heat of desert worlds, a feeling that the reef cannot follow them there. And so when they do fight on such ground, their rituals become more intense, more private. The oaths longer, the silence is deeper, as if they are carrying their home within them, drop by drop, memory by memory. There's a quiet kind of sadness in that too, because for all their strength, the iron snakes are alone. Their beliefs are not shared by the greater Imperium. Their cult is theirs and theirs alone. And yet they persist. They whisper to the waves, they dream of the deep, and they return, always, to the water. For them, salvation isn't found in the light of the Astronomicon, but in the pull of the tide. In the rhythm of waves that have never stopped, not even when the galaxy burned. This belief system also shapes how they view death. To die far from water is to die unanchored. So when an iron snake falls in battle, their brothers will often carry a vial of Ithacan seawater to anoint the body. It's a gesture of return, a way to call the spirit back to the reef. And if the body cannot be recovered, the squad will still perform the rite, pouring water into the earth, whispering the name, and letting the silence answer. It's one of the most haunting things I've ever read in the lore. That even across galaxies, across stars, the bond with the sea is never broken. This faith, this reverence for the unseen and the fluid, makes the iron snakes feel profoundly different. Not less imperial, but more grounded, more ancient, like they walk with one foot in the present and the other deep in some forgotten myth. They remind us that even in a world ruled by machines and monsters, there's still space for salt, for story, for something sacred. And that maybe, just maybe, not all gods have thrones. Some have tides. There's something about the iron snakes that feels distant, even when you're deep into their lore. It's not that they're emotionless or that they lack humanity, far from it. It's that they've refined their sense of self so completely that they simply don't need the world to validate them. In a setting where glory, martyrdom, and spectacle often define what it means to be a hero, the iron snakes step into battle with a silence that says, "We do not care. If you remember us, we remember ourselves." Their sense of honor is internal, not performative. They don't wear medals or adorn their armor with garish symbols of victory. You won't find grandiose speeches or banners declaring their triumphs. They don't issue proclamations before war, and they don't linger after it. When the job is done, they return home without ceremony, without thanks. They carry their victories the way they carry their dead, quietly, respectfully, and without need for applause. This restraint gives them an almost unnerving presence, especially when compared to more flamboyant chapters like the Blood Angels or the Black Templars. There's no theatricality to the Iron Snakes, no hunger for grandeur. They operate with a kind of calm detachment that can easily be mistaken for coldness. But that's not what it is. It's discipline. It's self-containment. It's the belief that true honor doesn't come from being seen. It comes from doing what must be done, even when no one is watching. And that sense of isolation is not just physical, it's psychological. The Iron Snakes are comfortable with being alone. They're used to the silence between missions, the absence of praise, the long stretches of time when no one sends for them, and no one speaks their name. This detachment isn't born of arrogance, it's survival. Ithaca is a world that teaches you to endure, to depend only on those who share your tide, your reef, your blood. That mentality bleeds into everything they do. They are not part of the Imperium's social machinery. They're a blade held in reserve, only drawn when truly needed. Fans often describe them as monastic, and there's truth to that. But it's not a monasticism of serenity, it's one of focus. When an Iron Snake takes an oath, it becomes the axis of his world. Everything else falls away: fear, pride, distraction, doubt. What's left is a kind of clarity that most people never touch. And that clarity makes them terrifying. Because you can't threaten someone who's already surrendered everything except the mission. They don't boast, not because they lack achievement, but because they don't measure worth in the same way others do. An Iron Snake doesn't recount his kills or campaigns. He remembers names, of brothers, of civilians saved, of oaths fulfilled. That's his currency. That's his weight. And so when they walk through the halls of their fortress, there's no air of superiority, no swagger, just presence, just memory. Just men who carry the ocean with them in their silence. Their interactions with outsiders often reflect this aloofness. They don't go out of their way to explain themselves. They don't correct misconceptions. If another chapter misinterprets their actions, they let them. If a planetary governor bristles at their lack of ceremony, they ignore him. Approval is not their goal. The reef doesn't ask to be understood, it simply is. And the Iron Snakes have taken that same posture, immutable, tidal, beyond the reach of petty politics or ego. Some say this makes them hard to work with, and they're not wrong. The Iron Snakes aren't team players in the traditional sense. They don't mesh easily with other Imperial forces because they're not designed to. They don't share command, don't defer to distant authorities unless their oath compels them to. It's not defiance, it's alignment. Their loyalty isn't to voices from Terra. It's to their own traditions, their own honor code, and the reef that shaped them. And yet, within that isolation, there is intense brotherhood. The bond between Iron Snakes is not loud or sentimental, it's bone deep. They don't express affection, but they fight like they are extensions of one another. There's trust in every movement, in every glance. When one falls, the others don't scream or rage. They continue, with even more precision, because grief is not a distraction, it's fuel. And later, when the mission is over, they will remember. They will speak the name, and the reef will carry it. Their dignity is quiet. It comes from knowing who they are and why they fight. They don't need a crusade to feel purposeful. Every oath is its own war. Every squad, a complete blade. And because of that, they don't fear being forgotten. They expect it. They were made to be unseen. And in a galaxy that burns bright with empty spectacles, that darkness is a kind of purity. I've read fan theories that describe the Iron Snakes as the soul of what the Astartes were meant to be. Warriors who don't serve power, but purpose. Soldiers who don't care about the Imperium's crumbling glory, only about the promise they made to protect a specific piece of it. That makes them both deeply inspiring and deeply tragic. Because in choosing not to seek the spotlight, they've guaranteed they'll be overlooked. But maybe that's exactly how they want it. Because while other chapters carve their names into the stars, the Iron Snakes carve theirs into stone, into the bones of the dead, into the minds of those who were saved without ever knowing by whom. And that kind of legacy, the invisible one, is perhaps the most enduring of all. If the Iron Snakes had monuments, Petro the Thriceborn would stand at the center. Not because he wanted it, he would have despised that kind of reverence, but because his story defines everything the chapter believes in. Petro isn't just a hero among the Iron Snakes. He's a myth made flesh, a warrior whose very name is a reminder that death, for them, is not an ending. It's a tide you fight your way through, again and again, until the reef claims you for good. He earned the name Thriceborn not from ceremony, but from blood. The first time he fell was during a skirmish deep within the drowned temples of Thalos. A Xenos construct tore into his squad and crushed his chest, should have killed him, but he lived. Barely. Dragged from the depths by his brothers and rebuilt in silence. The second death came during a boarding action in the upper atmosphere of Varix, where a hull breach threw him into the void. Days later, he was found clinging to a dead ship, his armor cracked, oxygen gone, still breathing. Somehow. The third time? No one talks about the third time in detail. Just that he walked alone into a Tyranid nest to save a group of trapped civilians and returned weeks later, limping, bloodied, carrying a single child in one arm and a Xenos skull in the other. That's the thing about Petro. He doesn't just survive, he endures. And not because he's the strongest or the fastest or the deadliest, but because his will is iron. Fans often describe him as the embodiment of Ithacan stubbornness, someone who just refuses to let the tide take him. And you feel it in every mission he leads. There's this absolute certainty that he will return, not because fate protects him, but because he made a promise. And for an Iron Snake, that's stronger than any armor. But Petro isn't the only one whose name echoes through reef and memory. There's Dymas, the deep strike specialist, whose oaths often take him behind enemy lines with no support, no backup, just his bolter and the sea's whisper. He once held a collapsing bridge on the ocean world of Nyreth against a full cult uprising, firing down the length of a causeway while floodwaters raged at his feet. The bridge collapsed. The cult was drowned. Dymas walked out, soaked and silent, oath fulfilled. And then there's Priad, the more philosophical of the chapter's warriors. Some say he was marked from birth. He speaks less than most Iron Snakes, which is saying something. But when he does, every word feels carved from stone. He was part of the squad that destroyed the Hekar Expanse, a void fortress infested with demonic constructs. His brothers say he didn't blink once during the exorcism rites, not even when the walls bled. He wrote down every brother's name who died that day. Not in a ledger, but into the hilt of his gladius. One name per line, etched with his own blade. The weapon has since become a relic, passed down to those who swear similar oaths. There's also the tale of Vorn, the reef bearer. A massive presence even among the Astartes, Vorn carried the chapter standard, but not one stitched in cloth. His was a banner of sculpted coral, cut from Ithacan reefstone and reinforced with adamantium. It said he would slam the banner into the ground before every battle and swear his life to the soil it touched. When he died holding a breach against Dark Eldar raiders, the coral shattered. Not broken by force, but by the fulfillment of his vow. His death was seen as the reef releasing him. No statue was raised. Just a pool of salt water left where he fell, replenished yearly by the hands of initiates. Even their librarians, often the more aloof members of other chapters, carry legends of their own. One such figure, Alathon, was rumored to speak with the reef spirits. He didn't channel the warp in the conventional way. Instead, his visions came through tide patterns, coral growths, even the sounds of shell fragments washing against the monastery's stone steps. His prophecies weren't cryptic or theatrical. They were simple, direct, and they always came true. When Alathon spoke, squads changed course, oaths were rewritten, and whole campaigns adjusted, because the reef had spoken. But what makes these stories so powerful is how few people outside the chapter know them. These aren't tales told by Ministorum orators or inscribed into cathedral walls. They exist in whispers, in shared moments between brothers, in half-remembered lines passed from one generation to the next. And that's exactly what gives them weight. There's no embellishment, no spectacle, just memory, just purpose. And if that makes them seem smaller than the legends of Dante or Lysander or Vulcan Heastan, then maybe we're asking the wrong question. Because the scale of a story doesn't determine its worth. The Iron Snakes don't measure heroism in system-wide victories or planetary conquests. They measure it in fulfilled oaths, in brothers returned, in the silence after the last shot is fired. A single child saved, a single shrine defended, a single promise kept. Some fans even argue that the Iron Snakes' greatest heroes are the ones we've never heard of. The warriors who never returned, whose names were carved into the reef, whose stories live only in salt and silence. And maybe they're right. Because for the Iron Snakes, legend isn't about recognition, it's about meaning. And meaning, like the sea, doesn't need to shout, it just needs to remain. For all their oaths, victories, and sacrifices, the Iron Snakes remain largely absent from the grand narratives of the Imperium. You won't find their name etched in the stained glass of cathedral windows, or chanted by the faithful during holy days of remembrance. They're not invited to the grand triumphs of Terra, nor are their deeds retold by remembrancers and imperial propagandists. And yet, without them, entire sectors would have fallen into ruin. Xenos infestations would have taken root. Cult uprisings would have spread. Whole planets would have vanished beneath the tide. So why does no one talk about them? Part of it is political. The Imperium isn't a system built to reward silent excellence. It thrives on spectacle, parades, martyrdom, dramatic declarations. Space Marines who loudly proclaim their loyalty, who bleed in public, who die with dramatic flair, they're easy to write songs about. They fit the narrative. The Iron Snakes don't. They don't share reports. They don't ask for credit. They act without permission if the oath demands it. And that independence, while effective, doesn't play well with bureaucrats or strategists obsessed with order and hierarchy. There's also the problem of scale. The Iron Snakes don't fight wars that move stars. They don't deploy thousands of warriors across dozens of systems. They fight small, quiet, local. A single squad, a single ship, a single goal. And so, when the battle is won, there's no burning skyline, no monument left behind, just silence, just a healed wound. And in the vast sprawl of Imperial space, those kinds of victories vanish like mist. The Administratum files them under local anomaly resolved and moves on. It doesn't help that the Iron Snakes rarely engage with other chapters. They're not part of large crusades. They don't sit on the councils. They don't write to Terra unless absolutely necessary. Their alliances, if you can call them that, are short-lived and utilitarian. Other Space Marines often find them difficult to read, too reserved, too inward. Their rituals seem strange, their silence unsettling. And while there's no enmity, there's no camaraderie either. They're respected, but at a distance. Like a storm that passes just far enough to avoid, but still leaves you watching the horizon. I've always thought it's ironic how some of the loudest chapters in the galaxy, the ones covered in glory and banners and relics, are also the ones with the most internal fractures. Meanwhile, the Iron Snakes, with no need for praise, remain whole. There's something telling in that. Glory demands an audience. The Iron Snakes never ask for one. They fight because they must, not because someone's watching. And that makes them hard to celebrate. The Imperium doesn't know what to do with warriors who don't ask to be remembered. Even within the Adeptus Astartes, you get the sense that the Iron Snakes are spoken of in passing, if at all. Some chapters admire their purity, their cohesion. Others see them as too self-contained to trust in coordinated efforts. I've read accounts where Ultramarines' envoys praise the Iron Snakes' discipline, but privately express discomfort at their spiritual practices. Too unorthodox, too personal. As if the idea of faith not directed solely at the Emperor were a threat, even if that faith fuels absolute loyalty. And then there's the ecclesiarchy, which seems unsure how to approach them. The Iron Snakes are not heretical. They revere the Emperor. But they don't engage in the rituals expected of Astartes. They don't chant the same litanies. Their chaplains are more like sea priests than preachers. Their rites are saturated with local tradition and marine mysticism rather than the canonical texts of Terra. So the Church largely leaves them alone, perhaps out of fear of drawing attention to something they cannot control, perhaps out of respect, however reluctant. To me, that silence is tragic and beautiful, because it means the Iron Snakes exist in the blind spot of history. Their victories are never publicized. Their losses go unmourned by the galaxy, but they keep going. They don't need medals. They don't need statues. Every name carved into the reef back on Ithaca is enough. And maybe that's what makes them the purest kind of space marine. Loyal not to legacy, but to duty. And yet, for all that silence, they leave a mark. You talk to survivors on the planets they've saved, and you'll hear stories, always whispered, always secondhand, of warriors who came from the sea, who fought like shadows, who vanished without a word, of sacred salt left behind on doorsteps, of names carved into coral and washed by the tide. These aren't official records. They're myths, living ones. And that's how the Iron Snakes survive, in folklore, not dogma, in memory, not archives. Some fans think it's intentional, that the chapter actively avoids recognition because fame is a kind of weakness, that once you become a symbol, you stop being a weapon. Others say they're just playing a longer game, one that values consistency over reputation. I don't know which is true, maybe both, maybe neither. But I do know this, the Imperium owes them more than it knows. And maybe one day, when the stars finally go dark and the last oaths are spoken, the reef will rise and remind the galaxy who kept it safe for so long. Quietly, without thanks, without witness. The more I look at the Iron Snakes, the more convinced I am that they're not just underrated. They're foundational in ways we rarely talk about. They don't just defend forgotten systems. They preserve an idea, a way of war and honor that's vanishing in a galaxy obsessed with noise and flame. They remind us what the Adeptus Astartes were meant to be. Oath-bound, autonomous, incorruptible. Not angels of spectacle, not symbols of propaganda, but warriors of quiet purpose. They are the reef beneath the storm, the unseen current that holds the structure of the Imperium in place, even as the waves crash harder every century. What makes them so special is that nothing about them demands your attention. Their armor isn't painted to impress. Their victories aren't sung in cathedrals. They don't brandish relics for show. Their chaplains don't preach to crowds. And yet, there's this silent gravity to them. A weight you feel as you read through the scraps of lore and stories whispered by survivors or found in the corners of old battle records. They carry meaning, not because they ask you to see it, but because it's carved into everything they do. They show us that honor doesn't need witnesses, that brotherhood doesn't require banners, that oaths, when sworn quietly and kept without applause, shape reality just as much as the loudest crusade. They prove that being forgotten doesn't mean being unworthy. In fact, sometimes the ones you forget are the ones who kept everything from collapsing while the rest screamed for attention. And let's be honest, we need stories like this in the Warhammer universe. Because for all the grandeur and apocalypse, for all the Primarchs and Demon Princes and Burning Stars, there's something refreshing about a chapter that never asked to be anything but exactly what they are. 100 warriors, one company, one world, and an oath that runs deeper than any chain of command. It makes you pause, makes you think, makes you wonder how many other names we've lost to time, not because they failed, but because they were never interested in being remembered. Petro the Thrice-Born didn't come back from the dead 3 times to hear his name chanted in Terra's great halls. He came back because someone needed saving, because the oath wasn't finished, because the reef hadn't let him go yet. That's the core of the Iron Snakes. They're not chasing destiny, they're finishing promises. And in that way, they become something more than a chapter. They become a reminder that maybe when all the dust settles and the last fortress falls, it won't be the loudest voices that matter. It'll be the ones who kept going, who showed up, who made sure the darkness didn't take everything. So yeah, when people talk about the most underrated chapters in the Imperium, I always think of them. Of the Iron Snakes and the salt that binds them. Of the sea that whispers their names. Of the oaths we'll never hear and the wars they'll never get credit for. And I think maybe it's better that way. Maybe their silence is a gift, not a flaw. A space for us to reflect, to learn to carry that same stillness into whatever storms we face. Because in a universe that never stops screaming, the Iron Snakes stand quiet. They endure. They remember. And now, maybe, so will you. If you made it this far, thanks for diving into this lesser-known corner of Warhammer 40k with me. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next story we unearth from the shadows of the Imperium. There's a whole galaxy of forgotten heroes out there, and I promise, we're just getting started.